I think our first one is BDC. Well, can we flip? Is it possible to flip everything up on the screen again? Like we used to do? Yeah.
Yep. Kevin, you want me to
Are
do that?
live.
I'm guessing that
Yeah, Tom,
everybody
if you could
has
do
the
that.
pages in front of them. All right, fantastic.
Yep. And then Tom, if you want to, yeah, open the PDF.
Thank you. All
Yep.
right. Questions, anyone?
So just real high level recap on this one. If the changes are on the second page where we add in the language regarding fund balance. If you remember, this was one that was revisited a year ago. At that time, the request was to remove any language about a fund balance threshold. Instead, we want to go to a more dynamic measure for fund balance threshold. Since Cindy got here, she identified DESI has a worksheet that is specifically designed to calculate how big of a fund balance does a district need to cover its expenses over the course of the year. It responds to what our revenue and expenses are. And so this would be shifting us to annually using that form from DESI based off the annual Secretary of the Board report to calculate what our threshold should be. And then if our fund balance is below that threshold, the board would develop a plan to get us above the threshold.
Have we ever seen that?
It was presented at the work study. Cindy, you want to talk about it?
I can't remember.
Yes. So at the end of the budget work study session, we talked about DESI's fund balance analysis. And
Right,
so
remember
we
that.
talked about using the 22-23 ASBR and the data that was included in it to calculate what that fund balance percentage should be. So when I went through the exercise, the fund balance was 29.57 based on the information in that 22-23 ASBR. And so that's when we talked about that for right now, based on that information, a 30% made sense. But we use that tool to determine if 30% made sense based on that data.
Okay. All right, I remember the meeting.
The only comment I had to make, and this applies to the next policy as well, is when we do vote on it, the board meeting, if we could just make sure that it's not one of the consensual items, but at least pull it out to be looked at individually, just because it's been under focus in board discussions.
I agree with you, Dr. Asner, 100%. All right, I'm in agreement with the changes. Dr. Asner, I guess. All right, HA negotiations.
Yep. So this one we had a regulation HAR where a lot of the really important negotiation pieces were living. We wanted to move that language out of the regulation and switch that to the policy, because the regulation can be changed relatively quickly where the policy has more procedural steps to be changed. And so we felt that the content in there is important enough that it should live in the policy.
And if I remember right, a regulation can be changed unilaterally by the superintendent. Does not have to go through the board. And that was the problem with this, especially when we talked about people on this, who would be on the negotiating team. Because nobody on the board, at least I didn't, and I'm guessing Dr. Asner and so many of the others did not realize that we did not have our CFO on the negotiating team.
So the idea here is that those important pieces here would live in the policy as opposed to regulation. So everything in blue is language taken directly from the existing regulation, but just moving that to the policy. There is some language in red, and working with Katina Lyles, we identified a couple other pieces that we wanted to shore up a little bit. One of them was about the size of negotiation teams. So it's much more efficient to have smaller teams. So put in there that the district's preference is no more than 6 individuals on a negotiation team. So that way we're keeping groups a little bit smaller, a little bit easier to build consensus. And then also that, and the second part of that, this was MSBA language of having the district negotiation team. Wait, I'm sorry, this was the recommendation from the board, include the CFO or a designee from the finance department.
Right.
And then the MSBA recommendation was also, once you have the board, the negotiation team identified, you can't make changes to the negotiation team without board approval.
I think also Kevin did a great job here of also adding in the recommendations from legal that took place just after where we were with negotiations in previous years. And so those pieces are also added in. So thank you for doing that, Kevin.
Yep, absolutely.
I have one question that on it's which I never knew existed. It says that page 2, all agreements must contain a clause that allows the board to unilaterally modify the contract in emergency situations such as natural disasters or financial hardships. Did we ever define financial hardship?
So there is not a definition. That language there is taken verbatim from statute.
What does that mean? Could we have got, when I read that, I wasn't, does that mean, could we
No,
have
but
changed the contract?
when we looked at that financial hardship, I think a year ago,
Yeah.
the determining factor from legal at that time was not being able to deliver the quality of services. And so when we looked at those pieces, that was a conversation that came out that really spoke to that financial hardship.
Okay. It would be
But
nice.
again, that's straight from statute.
Yeah, I just wish that had been defined, but if it's straight from statute, the legislator is the one that have to define it, not us.
And in the courts. Yeah.
I was gonna say that's it. Also, we want to be very careful about that because it might have to be defined in court if we don't.
Yeah, that's my guess. It's going to have to be if it's by legislation. Okay, thank you.
And so then on the regulation, what we're doing here is just we're sending all of the regulation since everything that's in it
Go on,
now is in policy. So we would no longer have an HAR.
Should we wait for Dr. Cuneo for a moment?
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay. Alrighty, on to ceremonies and observances.
There was only one minor tweak in here, and this was we adopted the MSBA recommendations, and they had the wrong name for what is Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math STEM Week. So we changed it to what the official name is of the observance.
Sounds great.
So this is a regulation that hasn't been looked at in a while, the student transportation in private vehicles and common carriers. This is kind of consistent with what we've been seeing with other policies from MSBA, where it used to be pulling a lot of language verbatim from statute and then putting that into the policy. But then the rub is while that might cover state statute, there might also be something federally that applies as well. And so then it gets muddy of, well, are we only speaking to state regulations and laws? Or are we also speaking to federal? And so in a lot of places here, they're removing the verbatim language from statute or state regulation and just saying the law. So that way it covers state and federal, as well as anything that might be coming from courts. We also had some clarification in the beginning about carpooling. This is not as much of a problem with our district, but you're seeing other districts around the state that are more actively coordinating carpooling amongst families. And then it gets into a gray area of, is that a district provided transportation or not? So we added that clarification. Doesn't directly apply to us, but other districts in the state are seeing it. And so we went ahead and adopted that MSBA recommendation too.
If an individual carpools and someone gets hurt, is the district responsible?
It is not. And that's what this is specifying.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah, nothing to add there.
All right, let's go to the next.
And this is another one where it's been a minute since we've looked at JO.
Yeah. I can't remember when we last looked at student rights.
It's been a minute. So in the policy, it's mostly just family-centric language was the bulk of the updates. Some capitalization. And then the regulations is where we got into some more substantive changes.
And I'm sorry to be that guy, but I just want to ask again. Are we capitalizing district and superintendent, or the intention is not to capitalize it?
Yeah, the intention is to not capitalize it. So if we missed a couple, we'll get that.
Missed a couple.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, the word family at the very bottom in red is either misspelled or maybe it was fixed since my copy.
We will double check that.
The very bottom, not of this page, of the last page.
So then the regulation, we did add some additional sections to this that were some changes to statute and state regulation, which those pick up on page bottom of 6 and then spilling over into 7. And so again, this is a result of some statutory changes about law enforcement access, children's division access, and then military and higher education access, then also volunteer access. And so we just took MSBA's recommendation language and just adopted that on face value. And then records retention also clarified that language as well. This is not a problem for special school district that we've been retaining records for the life of the document. But this has been a problem in other parts of the state, so they wanted to add that into the regulation that we're holding on to those documents. And then JOR1, this was a regulation about us digitizing our records. We've done that, so the regulation really is outlived its useful life.
Okay.
Referencing a plan that would be completed in 2019.
And it was.
It was completed. So everything at least lives on a microfiche or another form of a digital form. We're now in the process of they're all connected right now. So we're in the process of separating those records. And they're working their way backwards. So I think we're in the 70s now. So we're almost to the 60s. So nearing completion.
Closed meetings was one of the issues that we've had different times difficulties with what is defined as a closed meeting. I have no suggestions on the policy or the policy. What I would recommend is that there is a pamphlet that defines closed meeting. I'd recommend that be given to every board member again, especially every new member. I think MSBA puts one out. I remember getting a pamphlet once upon a time. We had, I forget the individuals' names, but our individuals that serve as lobbyists picked them up for us and distributed them when they came to a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
But we had a large discussion on whether budget is a closed meeting.
Mm-hmm. And that is, so beginning on page 2 of the policy, that closed topics section at the bottom, everything there, item 1 through 23, is everything that's within statute that would allow for a closed meeting. So that is the exhaustive list of all of the topics that are eligible for a closed meeting.
And I was going to say, if you look at that list, we follow that pretty closely, just in what are those items that can be in executive session, and then what's in the business meeting for those, just for the remainder of the conversation. So that exhaustive list, which is there, is key.
The one thing, Dr. Macklin, I just want to make sure that we continue to do, we've been doing it, but when we make the statement for closed session, we actually specify what is going to be in there, which of these we're going to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
And when we set up the closed session meeting, at the board meeting prior to this, we spell it out. I just want to make sure we always continue doing that.
Okay.
We had a problem with that in the past.
I think that's key. I think it's key for transparency. It's also key, just as you look at where we are with legislature and all those pieces and sunshine requests. So I think that's key.
Is this one that you'd like to have as an action item, or are you comfortable with
Please.
this being on the consent?
Do you mind if we have this as an action item?
Unless they're making the same request. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, if we have it as an action item, it pulls it on and everybody at least looks at it a little closer. Okay. I have nothing else on this. I had nothing on this one. Dr. Asner, anything?
Nothing to add.
It's pretty straightforward.
The one big change that you're going to see as a theme across the next couple is the state legislature have added the requirement that if you have adult learners, so those 18 plus who are post high school, in a setting, they have to do a criminal background check to be in the same area as a K-12 student. And so you're going to see that theme kind of running through the next couple.
I had a question about that.
Mhm.
I can't remember if there was a comment on this, but it says that they have to have a background check. What happens if the results of the background check show that there have been some concerns?
Yeah, that's a good question. So at this point, the benefit that we have for the district is the only adult programs that we have taking place in the same space as a K-12 setting are our LPN program and our CNA program for adults. And so both of those programs, because of the nature of them, they're healthcare-based programs, that they really can't have any violations on there at all. And so at this point, if something comes back beyond minor traffic violations or something along those lines, the student is not going to matriculate into the program.
Thank you.
Mhm. And then JEC here, this is just that continuation of the adult learner piece, but then adding some clarification about social security numbers.
Why the clarifications on social security numbers? Because of data breaches?
Data breaches is one. It's become a big piece. It's also if you have undocumented students, and it's become kind of a gray area of do you require it, do you not? Most Missouri districts have moved away from it, but this was just MSBA really wanting to clarify that you're better off as a district just not having that.
Okay. Something. There's
Yep, and these changes also were about some recent changes that happened in the last legislative cycle. And then this feels like it's a boomerang. We talk about travel. It seems like every other year.
Yeah,
And so with
you raised it to $55, you know.
yeah. And so I don't know, Cindy, if you want to speak to a little bit the research that you guys did in coming up with the thresholds and the work you did with Tammy.
Yes, we had some requests, travel requests come back from staff who had traveled to areas within the country that are much higher in cost, right? So maybe you're talking about a Seattle or a Boston or a New York or DC kind of a thing. So there was concern that they couldn't eat, have a decent meal within some of those areas and still meet our requirement based on our policy and regulations. So we looked at it. I looked at a variety of different guidance from the state of Missouri, their Office of Administration, what they do as a state, as well as some national guidance, and then just kind of looking at what people do on the average. So the average for a lot of the guidance was $59 per day. And so we kind of looked at some of those areas, what it would cost for people to travel, what was the state average, national average norms, and tried to figure out what might be within reason. And so we kept our $30 per meal because we still felt like that was okay, but then raised it to $60 per day for some of those locations that might be a little bit more expensive for our staff to travel to. And then when they travel out of state, if they're going to be in excess of the $60 per day, then they would have to seek approval when they're requesting that travel from the CFO or director of purchasing prior to any travel being taken.
Okay.
Any questions on that?
Is this shared, then everybody will end up getting this? I mean, all of our employees, the union gets it, all this?
Yeah, so any staff member traveling, this would apply to. Yes, sir.
Okay, good.
And then this is the one we talked about a little bit at the work study about the changes regarding inventory management and capitalization thresholds of moving to the new state guideline of $5,000 as the capitalization threshold. The other, I pulled the Secretary of State's full recommendation list, and they also expand the definition of capital equipment to be a useful life of 2 years, where it used to be a useful life of 1 year. Keep in mind that in our schools, when you have, 15-year-olds using something, the useful life in industry might be 3 or 4 years, but in our setting, it might be 1. It's just not the same when you have young adults who are utilizing it.
Sorry, I realized I have a comment about the previous policies we were speaking that I just realized I should have made. Because that policy does involve a potential cost to the district, I realize it might not be much, but could we have an analysis or estimate of how much it's going to cost the district to raise that minimum when it's being presented to the board?
For DLCA?
Yes.
Yeah, for the
Thank you.
expenses. Okay. I'm fine with this.
We discussed this at the work
Yeah.
study.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so as we mentioned at the work study, that one is going to boomerang quickly. That it will be on as an info item for Tuesday, even though it just came to the board policy committee today, but we did kind of tee it up a little bit at the work study. And that just way we can get rolling and Cindy can start moving some money around and we can make sure that assets are going in correctly for tracking purposes.
Okay. Anything else, anyone? That was a very productive meeting. We got everything done in record time. Thank you,
Yeah, we
Kevin.
had some
Thank
biggies in
you.
here. There were some big policies and regs in this one.
Yeah, well, we had to get it done. All righty. Thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Have a great weekend. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Kevin,
Yep.
Kevin, hey, can you come down tomorrow?
Yep.